Fighting racism is hard work. Racism is so embedded in how we operate that sometimes it is hard to tease apart or see it for what it is. Racist systems and structures have been built so early in graduate training experiences that sometimes we don't question why we continue to evaluate whether there are other ways of doing things that are more equitable. The American Psychological Association in 2021 issued an apology to people of color for APA's role in promoting, perpetuating, and failing to challenge racism, racial discrimination, and human hierarchy in the United States. What are some examples of how these issues play out even at the graduate training level or even assessment level? How can we be courageous and speak up when we see inequities play out? And for white allies, not to give in to white fragility. What are some ways to begin infusing equitable practices into the field of psychology? Listen to my conversation with Dr. Monnica Williams, who has been vocal about her mission in fighting racism. Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zen. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Monnica Williams. She is a clinical psychologist, full professor, and director of Laboratory for Culture and Mental Health Disparities at the University of Ottawa and the School of Psychology, clinical and training director at Behavioral Wellness Clinic. Dr. Williams is the recipient of Presidential Award at APA Psychology of Women and has published over 150 peer-reviewed articles focused on anxiety-related disorders, OCD, and mental health amongst culturally diverse populations. She is the author of several books, which include Managing Microaggressions, Addressing Everyday Racism in Therapeutic Spaces, Eliminating Race-Based Mental Health Disparities, Promoting Equity and Culturally Responsive Care Across Settings, and Sexual Obsessions and OCD, a step-by-step definitive guide to understanding diagnosis and treatment. Additionally, Dr. Williams continues to engage in clinical practice delivering CBT treatments for adults and adolescents with OCD, PTSD, and anxiety disorders. As an African American psychologist, Dr. Williams will be discussing how we all participate in advancing racism and need to make courageous choices to bring about change in an ongoing journey to fight racism. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Can you tell me more about you and your work, as you are very accomplished? And so, given your experience, share with me your journey, how you got here today, as well as maybe something you're working on for the future.
I'm happy to talk about all of that. I think one of the things most people don't know about me is that I didn't really start out in psychology. I actually did my undergraduate degree in engineering.
Wow.
Yeah. I studied electrical engineering and biotechnology at MIT. And I worked in a computer science research lab at UCLA for a number of years before I decided to make a change.
Oh my gosh, that is such a huge change from engineering to psychology.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I should add, I didn't have a single undergraduate psychology course in, where I went to school. I went to MIT. They don't even have a psychology major. They have cognitive science, which I guess is the next closest thing. But yeah, I actually got interested in mental health when my then husband had a mental health breakdown and ended up eventually in the hospital with severe OCD.
Wow.
Yeah. And he had been unwell off and on for many years. We never knew what was wrong with him. We tried so many different approaches to getting help for him. And his condition would get better and get worse and get better and get worse. And, every time it got better, we thought, oh, good, he's doing well. But then it would unexpectedly get worse again. And it wasn't until one day it had gotten so bad, I was speaking to his sister, my sister-in-law, about what we were going through. And she's a psychologist. And she said, this sounds like OCD. You need to take him to the ER so he could get some help, and we did. And he got some really fantastic help at UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute. And I remember just being so impressed, so blown away by the work they were doing and how fast he got better with their intensive OCD treatment program, that I really wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn more about mental health. I wanted to understand, how does the mind break? And then how do we fix it when that happens, with that, I guess, kind of that engineer lens, right?
Yes.
And so I started taking classes. I started taking night classes at UCLA in psychology. And I just found it so fascinating that I decided I wanted to keep doing this work. I wanted to work with people, and I wanted to do research in mental health.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm glad that your then husband got better with the treatment. And something you mentioned, I also heard was that you were working and taking night classes.
Yes, I was working and taking night classes, and I had 4 children. Children. One
Oh
in
my gosh.
so
Wow. I'm a father right now. Oh my gosh. This one is enough for us.
I know. I kind of look back now and I'm like, I don't know what I was thinking, but yeah.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh. What an amazing journey. Does that also explain how during that time in your career, you were publishing a lot on OCD? I mean, you still do today.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I originally went to graduate school to study, OCD. And actually still, it's probably like my strongest research areas. I think I have like 60 publications in OCD, more in OCD than any other topic, actually. But I got interested in cultural issues very early in my graduate school career, when my advisor showed me a paper that they had done looking at OCD and a very sort of older classic self-report measure for obsessions and compulsions, where they found that the measure performed very differently in Black versus white students. And that really piqued my interest, because I'm like, well, this seems important, because this is a measure they're using to screen people clinically, to chart progress, to do research. And it didn't really even seem to be valid in the Black students. So it made me concerned about, what do we know about people of color, especially if we can't even measure the constructs that we're trying to study.
Yeah, yeah. So thinking about the differences, and if we aren't screening correctly for the Black students, thus it's not valid, or incorrectly detecting false positives.
Right. And in this condition, what had happened was they were giving the screening measure to the students, and they wanted to bring in the high scorers, so that, assuming that they were likely to actually have OCD, so that then they could, do some more research on them. And what happened is they found they were bringing in almost all Black students, and none of them had OCD. It was over detecting OCD in the Black students.
Huh. Did you get a chance to look at the questions that were creating the false positives?
Yes, actually. And that became an area I studied for years and continued to study after graduation. And it became my master's thesis, looking at trying to understand and explain these ethnic differences that we saw on that measure and similar measures. And what we found was that compared to white people, people of color are scoring much higher on contamination related items. They're giving much higher scores. And so then that's sort of pulling the score more in the direction of psychopathology, even though what we're really looking at in this case, I think, are more like cultural differences.
Now, regarding your other research in the area of multicultural topics, I have this book here, Managing Microaggressions, that you authored and published. I remember an excerpt where you were, I believe, on internship training and didn't have any supervisors of color. Is that a continuation of why you find yourself more invested and vocal about anti-racism work?
Oh, that's certainly a big piece of it, because, for one, just in our discipline as psychologists, I mean, we are, I think, a really vital backbone to mental health treatment and research. And if we're underrepresented or our voices aren't heard, then that means that people of color are not getting the attention, the treatment, the assessment, the research that they deserve. And that's going to contribute to mental health problems in communities of color. So for me, one of my missions at this point is to help diversify our field, help train and educate the clinicians that we already have out there so that there be more equity in terms of access to care and understanding mental health conditions broadly.
So, in thinking about this mission and trying to increase equity and access to this population that needs help, is there anything for our listeners? Most of us are clinicians, some are faculty members. Are there some recommendations or tips that you would provide to help support or increase representation in the field of psychology?
Yes, this has been something I've been focused on actually quite heavily the last few years, increasing representation. And it was something that I was already doing on a small scale in terms of my own lab, when I would, every year I would maybe recruit one graduate student into the program, and I'm looking for how I can do the most with the little piece of this pie that I have, bringing in a graduate student from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group that can help contribute to the diversity in the field. The problem is, at that rate, my one little contribution isn't going to do a whole lot, looking at the sea of psychologists everywhere and the great need in communities of color for psychologists to understand those communities. So I've been, particularly in the last few years, looking at the issue more broadly. I moved to Canada about 4 years ago, and believe it or not, the diversity in psychology in Canada is actually worse than what we see in the States. There's a lot more work we need to do here in Canada. So you look very surprised as I'm telling you.
Yeah, I am surprised because I thought Canada would have more diversity.
Yes, Canada is a very diverse country, and they pride themselves on their multiculturalism, but a lot of those ideals have yet to be realized. And as far as psychology goes, they're pretty far behind.
Now, you mentioned getting entry just even to the profession can be a challenge. You have any ideas as to what might be happening there?
Oh, yes. I actually have studied this. I know what's happening there.
Okay.
It's a mentorship model. So faculty are picking students that they want to be in their labs. And what they tend to do, and I don't think consciously, is pick students who are just like them. So if we already have a faculty that's mostly white people studying issues that are important to white people, they're picking students that fit right into that. And so that's preventing the diversity. And then when they do occasionally let a student of color in, that student does not feel welcome or understood because the atmosphere is one where perhaps their culture, their concerns, their research interests aren't seen or supported. And so then you end up having a lot of people of color who go through that process feeling unsupported, if they even get through it all. And then after that, they're like, I don't want anything to do with academics. And they don't become professors. And maybe they go into private practice. But by and large, the problem is reproducing. And now we do have, professional schools, graduating PsyDs. We see more diversity in those programs because there aren't as many barriers to people of color getting in. But we know that's a very high price tag. Not everybody can afford that.
Yeah, I remember reading up on PsyD programs, and they tended to be more expensive and was a clinical practice route versus a faculty or teaching route. Now, there's an important message that you wanted to share with us in talking about how we all participate in advancing racism, and we need to make some courageous choices. And there's an important point. You mentioned for faculty members and clinicians who are white, you gave clear examples. There are also minoritized groups who identify with people of power, and there are issues with internalized racism. So can you give examples where all of us can be courageous in fighting racism in the field of psychology?
Yeah, there's so many ways, but even just sticking with the example of bringing in more graduate students of color, right? So when I'm looking for graduate students, I'm not looking for the same things the other faculty are looking for. They tend to be looking at GRE scores and grades and, what research labs were you in? And do I know the people whose research labs you were in? And I'm looking for how can I contribute the most to making our field diverse? And so I'm not as interested in grades. And of course, they have to have a strong academic record to show that they can do the work. But honestly, there's very little difference at the end of the day between a 3.9 and a 3.7, right? But it's so competitive, you end up weeding out even the 3.7s. So, the students I pick, I'm not obsessed with the idea that they have to they have to be in the top 1% of their class. I want to see, are they capable of doing the work and can they learn? And then what aspects of diversity do they bring, right? So I'm not interested in their GRE scores. But a lot of schools, they get fixated on that because they want to show, oh, hey, this is our incoming class. And they don't, and they don't necessarily value the things that I'm looking for when I bring in students. So I have to fight sometimes with admissions committees or justify my choices to bring in the people that I want to bring in. And so this is an area where you may have to step up and be courageous and say, look, I know that on paper, looking at the metrics you're looking at, my student doesn't look as strong, but you're not looking at these other metrics that I'm taking into consideration, like the fact that they speak 3 other languages and 2 of those other languages, are indigenous dialects, right? Because we're not valuing that specific aspect in our candidate. So that's an example of where it's going to take courage, because that everybody else, because they're so programmed into looking at these specific aspects, they're not going to automatically understand why I'm going to bring in a graduate student that doesn't seem to fit their mold.
I see. As you are describing this, you're placing a value on the fact that people of color are bringing in something different and have access to a community. As we all know, mental health does not discriminate. And how do we recruit students who can potentially help that community and nurture the student's career path?
Right. So one of the things we did at the University of Ottawa is we actually revamped our entire admissions structure and these criteria. We actually have a very formal ranking grid where, I know all programs kind of tend to prioritize the same thing. We actually had a very formal process for, you get this many points for your GPA, you get this many points for publications and so forth, or posters. And this goes into like who gets in. And we realized after spending a year examining this, that every single criteria on our ranking grid was racist. And so either we had to throw that out and come up with something else. And no one wanted to throw out our beloved ranking grid. I don't know why they were so wedded to it, but we did make changes to it. But more importantly, we created a BIPOC pool, and we decided that we were going to admit 2/3 BIPOC every year for both representation and restorative goals, recognizing the years previous where people of color were barred because of these racist admission criteria.
Oh my gosh, that is so transformative. I really wish more graduate programs would do that.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's going to catch on. This is the first year that we actually did it formally. And we were so pleased with the results. We met all of our goals for our English speaking cohort. We get 2/3 students of color. At our university, it's bilingual. We have French English. We did not meet our goals for the French cohort, but we're going to keep trying. And we'll have to tweak and adjust things as needed. But I'm so proud of the strides that our program has taken to really address this problem.
Well, thank you so much for speaking up and creating a space for students of color and getting into the field. Now, you mentioned that some of the scoring items are racist. In what way are the items racist?
Sure. So one of the items is like, did you go to a conference? Did you work in a research lab? So to do a poster or go to a conference, you have to be in a research lab in order to do that. Being undergraduates working in research labs, that tends to be volunteer work, right? You're putting a lot of time and energy into something you're not getting paid for. So already you have to have a certain amount of affluence to be able to do that and maintain high grades. But also we know that going and working in these research labs is subject to the same kind of biases as you would experience in any situation where you're looking for a job. So the research labs are going to tend to pick people that are just like the professor who runs the lab and his grad students, and they're going to tend to be white. And so we know that students of color, students with foreign sounding names, students who English isn't their first language, they're going to be disadvantaged having those opportunities. And so that those structural problems create a racial disparity in terms of what kind of research preparation students are going to have coming in.
Yeah, the structures just aren't there to support them, even at the early stages. We think about how past is a predictor of future behavior, but if in the past you aren't given opportunities, how can you create that future behavior when it comes to research labs, publications, and so forth?
Exactly. And so, and I don't want you to think that I'm saying we're going to just like let in all these students who have had no research experience whatsoever, I mean, that wouldn't be practical either. But there are enough students of color who've had some research experience, may not be as strong as the research experience some of the students with all the advantages had, but enough that we can say, okay, you know what, this is meaningful. And I think this student can do well with a little bit more opportunity and support.
Now, I have a question that I ask all my guest speakers. As a person of color, can you share with me some of the challenges you went through and overcame?
Oh boy, yes, many challenges. A lot of the challenges that I, have to deal with are, just by virtue of the way that I look and the skin that I was born into, and, being a Black woman in a racist society where, being an African American woman puts you pretty much at the bottom of the socio-racial hierarchy. So it's always a battle to buck stereotypes. And also, I would just say, honestly, to maintain self-esteem when there's so many pervasive messages that are, telling you or telling me as a Black woman that I don't have the same value as a white person or the same value as a man.
Yeah, yeah. And why is it that one must value what a white man or a white woman wants, thus placing a hierarchy of values being better than another, rather than appreciating that you have wonderful values and that being okay?
Right, right. But that's not what people do.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Ah, ah,
Right. So,
yeah.
I mean, and I can think about all the way back to, oh my goodness, high school, having to fight in order to be recognized, as a top student. I remember very clearly going to my counselor's office to try to, get letters of recommendation for the universities I was applying to. And I showed her the list of places I was going that included all top tier schools. And she pretty much yelled at me and threw me out of her office. Okay. And I was completely baffled and confused as to why she would do that, because that's her job to support the students. And the next day she was nicer and she's like, oh, okay, sorry, I guess I was having a bad day. But, that shouldn't happen to a student. You go in and you say, look, I need letters of recommendations for these schools. I was applying to, Stanford and Princeton and MIT. And, you would think that the guidance counselor would be excited to support a student who felt capable of going to places like that. And rather, instead, I got the absolute opposite of that.
Wow, I can't believe that. It is so incongruent from what we think about the role of guidance counselors. I mean, it even goes against what we think about the humanity of our experiences. How can we just support students who are already going through a difficult process?
Exactly. And I've heard from many other Black people. We did a research study where we brought in Black university students to ask them about their experiences of microaggressions in college, in universities. And they're reporting the same things. They're saying they went to their high school guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor said, oh, you don't need to apply to that school. How about these community college opportunities, or, some local school that really doesn't maybe have the prestige and resources of the place the student actually wanted to go and felt very qualified to attend. So we know this is still happening, that the guidance counselors, due to their own racism and stereotypes, are steering Black students away from better opportunities.
And I think from a white savior racist perspective is that I'm going to save you from the rejection of these schools.
Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
even, yeah.
And I think, and I'm so glad you're bringing up this white savior mentality, because, when I talk about making courageous choices to combat racism, one of those important choices that everybody can get behind is being an ally to people of color, which is the opposite to being a savior, right? So the savior, they feel like they know what's best and they're going to tell you what to do, and they're going to help you navigate, white supremacist systems of privilege. But the ally is going to listen to you, center your thoughts and your desires, and help you get to where you want to go based on your direction. And they're going to help dismantle those systems of privilege. So that's a really key difference between a savior and an ally. And I can tell you from my own experience, observations, and research that allyship is very, very hard.
Hmm. Hmm. Can you say what makes it hard?
Well, the thing that makes it hard, for one, is, when you talk about allyship in the abstract, everybody gets behind that. They're like, yes, I'm behind that. I would do that. I would stand up for a person of color if I needed to. In reality, nobody does it. And the reason that they don't is because of the very strong social programming around white solidarity. White people are trained from a very early age to always fall in line behind other white people. And so you will almost never see them publicly take the side of a person of color over other white people. And that's a lifetime of conditioning to overcome. And that's not easy. It's not an excuse, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. The group pulls you back in.
The group absolutely pulls you
Yes.
back in. And so people find that this is much harder than they ever imagined. I'm reminded of a situation where there was a panel of speakers for a social justice talk. I was good friends with one of the speakers, was a Black woman, and the members of the panel, they were all social justice oriented folks, activists, feminists. And one of the panelists was talking about a childhood experience and started using, this is a white panelist, started using the N-word. And it was very inappropriate. And Black friend and colleague on the stage was feeling very uncomfortable and was really like waiting for somebody to stop this person and explain that this was inappropriate. And nobody did. And after that, she didn't feel like she could continue the panel. She had to leave.
Oh my gosh, you won't feel safe.
Exactly. And so afterwards, I was brought in to sort of debrief and figure out what the heck happened here. And I sort of looked around at the other panelists. I'm like, why did nobody say anything? Did anybody care about the safety of the Black people there on the stage? And one of the panelists is a white woman. She's like, yes, I was horrified. I knew this was wrong. I knew what to do. And I just found myself paralyzed because I didn't want to hurt the feelings of the speaker. And I'm thinking, you're thinking about the feelings of the speaker. And like, what about this Black person sitting next to you on your left and your right and all the people listening? You were more concerned about the feelings of the white speaker than the feelings of the marginalized people. And that's when it really sort of clicked for me how strong this white solidarity is.
I mean, it just comes. We don't even expect it. We don't realize it. Hence, need to be deliberate and true to your message. To make courageous choices means we need to go against the norm.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So, Dr. Williams, how do we support you in your amazing work and your students? How can we support you?
Well, thank you for asking. I mean, for one, I would say, think about ways you can be courageous in your own life to combat racism, because it's an everyone issue. It's not just a person of color issue. Everybody participates in this system of racism. People who benefit from racism, they're invested in upholding it. People of color who've learned that they are punished by resisting racism, they participate and uphold it. So all of us need to find ways that we can push back against it. We're not going to fix everything overnight, but there's a lot of little things that we can do that we're not doing. And I would say start there. And for example, if you're like, let's say a professor like I am, you can maybe think about, what can I do to bring about diversity, in my own lab? Can I bring in more diverse students, right? That's something that you have control over. Nobody else can really do that except you. And then also we have a research fund, and always encourage people, if they can donate to our work around racial equity and justice research, that's always so appreciated. And so on my website, my lab website, which is mentalhealthdisparities.org, there's a place where people can donate, or they can reach out to me to help contribute to our work.
Okay, for all the listeners, I will include that in the show notes. Please, I encourage you to donate to the research fund.
Thank you so much.
Finally, Dr. Williams, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Oh, well, I just, want to reiterate that the work is hard. I'm not going to lie. It's not easy work, but it's worth doing.
Well, Dr. Williams, thank you. And I just want you to know that I'm giddy and totally nerding out by having you on this podcast. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
I hope you liked this episode. Please subscribe and share. We'd love to hear from you, so send me a message on LinkedIn or email. The People of Color in Psychology is brought to you by the Multicultural Counseling Institute, and I am your host, Jack Zeb.